Welcome to Griffonomics.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, so imagine a tree branch, right? It's just lightly brushing against a high-voltage power line deep in a dry, remote California forest.
A nightmare scenario for utilities, honest.
Exactly. And for over a century, a utility company simply wouldn't know about that tiny physical interaction. Not until the friction finally sparked, the line snapped, and a massive wildfire was already, engulfing the hillside.
Right, because they were completely blind to it.
But what if that mundane little gray plastic meter bolted to the side of your house was actually like a functioning AI supercomputer?
That changes everything.
It really does.
Yeah.
What if it could literally feel that specific branch hitting that specific wire miles away and cut the power in milliseconds before a single spark ever formed?
That's the reality we're moving toward.
And that's exactly what we're getting into. Today, we are diving into a curated stack of intelligence you've provided to us. And our mission today is to generate a granular, deeply strategic report and investment roadmap exploring a company called Itron.
Ticker symbol ITRI for those tracking it.
Right, ITRI.
Yeah.
We are tracking what is, honestly, without hyperbole, a monumental industrial transformation here.
It's massive.
We are watching a company pivot from being a legacy, hardware-based manufacturer of metal utility meters into this high-margin, artificially intelligent utility orchestrator.
Yeah, we are basically looking at a fundamental rewiring of modern infrastructure.
Which sounds like a huge undertaking.
Oh, it is. Because Itron is currently sitting at the exact chaotic intersection of century-old physical infrastructure and, bleeding-edge next-generation artificial intelligence.
And the timing is key, right?
Timing is the crucial element here. The aging electrical grid, as it was originally designed by Edison and Westinghouse over 100 years ago, well, it simply was not built for the modern era.
It was a very different world back then.
Exactly. It was designed as a one-way street, right? A massive, centralized coal or nuclear plant-generated power pushed it down the line and your house consumed it.
End of transaction.
Right. End of story. But today, that grid is buckling. It wasn't built to handle millions of electric vehicles plugging in at random hours.
Or massive arrays of solar panels pushing power backward onto the grid.
Exactly, or the intense, hyper-localized power demands of gigawatt-scale AI data centers. The grid is becoming wildly, unmanageably complex. The old analog tools just aren't sophisticated enough to keep the lights on anymore.
Which is why this deep dive is so critical. We've got 3 core investigative requirements to unpack today, based on the materials you've shared with us.
Lots of ground to cover.
Tons. First, we need to dissect Itron's integration of the NVIDIA Jetson platform directly at the edge of the grid.
A huge technological leap.
Absolutely. Second, we have to analyze the staggering margin expansion currently happening in their software-driven outcomes segment.
The financial side of this is wild.
It really is. And finally, we need to decode the mechanical strategy behind how they actually plan to convert a massive $4.4 billion with a B multi-year backlog into recognized revenue.
A lot of moving parts there.
Definitely. But I want to start by looking backward for a moment to truly appreciate the scale of this pivot. Let's look at the fundamental business model and their segment strategy.
Good place to start.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we look back 10 or 20 years, an Itron utility meter was essentially just a passive, dumb billing device, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. The industry relies on 2 major acronyms for that historical era. AMR, which stands for Automated Meter Reading, and SMI, which is Advanced Metering Infrastructure.
Okay, so AMR and AMI.
Right. Going back decades, the entire job of that glass and metal meter on the side of your home was just to count. It was an odometer for electricity.
Just ticking up the numbers.
Exactly. It would wake up, record how many kilowatt hours you consumed over a month, and send that single data point back to the utility so they could, print and mail you a bill.
So it was essentially a backward-looking cash register.
That's a great way to put it. Even when they upgraded to AMI, which added 2-way radio communication so the utility didn't have to pay a human to walk through your yard to read the dial, it was still fundamentally just a billing tool.
It just told the utility what happened in the past.
Exactly. It was strictly historical data.
It's like checking the total miles on your car's odometer once a month and trying to guess how the engine is performing based purely on that one number.
You have no clue.
Right. You have no idea if the oil pressure is low or the transmission is slipping. You just know the car moved a certain distance.
That is a brilliant analogy. The utility only knew how much power was consumed, not the quality or the safety of the power delivery.
But that's changing now.
drastically.
Yeah.
Today, Itron is abandoning that passive model. They are deploying a technology architecture they call distributed intelligence, or DI.
Distributed intelligence.
Right. They are shifting aggressively away from passive billing toward a concept called waveform data processing.
Okay, I need to pause right here because this is a phrase that gets thrown around in the intelligence a lot. Waveform data processing.
It's a mouthful.
It really is. What does that actually mean for the layperson? Like, if I'm not an electrical engineer, what is a waveform and why do we need to process it?
So think about the actual physics of electricity flowing into a building. It travels in a wave.
Okay.
In North America, alternating current pulses at 60 hertz, meaning the electrical current changes direction 60 times a second. It creates a smooth, continuous mathematical sine wave.
Got it.
Historically, a meter just counts the total volume of the waves passing through, like counting buckets of water.
Sure, just tallying up the bucket.
Exactly. But waveform data processing changes the entire paradigm. The meter is no longer just counting buckets, it is acting like a high-speed digital oscilloscope.
Oh, wow. So it's looking much closer.
Way closer. It is looking at the high-frequency, microscopic shape of that electrical wave in real time locally, right at the edge of the grid.
So instead of just tallying up the total power used, it's analyzing the physical characteristics of the electricity, the turbulence in the water, to keep the analogy going.
The turbulence is exactly what they are looking for because the meter is looking at the high-fidelity shape of the wave. It can instantly identify physical anomalies on the grid.
Because anything physical touching the wire changes the wave.
Yes. Every physical event creates a unique signature or distortion in the electrical waveform. If a transformer is starting to degrade and overheat, the waveform gets noisy.
Fascinating.
Or, if an underground cable's insulation is failing and moisture is seeping in, it subtly alters the harmonic frequency of the wave.
And a traditional meter wouldn't see that at all.
A traditional meter would be completely blind to this. A DI-enabled endpoint-performing waveform analysis sees that microscopic distortion instantly.
So going back to my opening scenario about the tree branch, the meter sees the waveform change when the branch hits the wire.
Right.
It recognizes the signature of that specific type of interference, and it knows a physical object is making contact.
It sees the interference, categorizes the risk level, and can physically trip the circuit or alert the central office before the mechanical friction degrades the wire enough to snap it.
It is wild.
It is. And to manage this massive leap in capability, Itron realized their old corporate structure didn't make sense anymore.
They had to reorganize.
Completely. They have completely realigned their internal reporting segments into 4 distinct pillars to reflect this new reality.
Let's break those pillars down because seeing where a company categorizes its revenue tells you exactly where its priorities lie.
Absolutely. So the first pillar is device solutions. This is the legacy hardware.
The standard water, gas, and electric meters.
Right, the physical metal and plastic. Then the second pillar is networked solutions.
Which is what? The communication side.
Exactly. This encompasses the communications infrastructure, the cellular modules, the radio frequency mesh networks, the digital highways that allow all these devices to talk to each other.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the third?
The third pillar is the outcomes segment. And this is the promised land for Itron.
Why is that?
This is where the value-added software, the AI analytics platforms, and the distributed compute recurring revenues live.
Ah, so it's the brain of the whole operation. It sounds like going from a flip phone that just makes calls to a smartphone that runs an entire app ecosystem.
That's a perfect comparison, but there's one more.
Right. The newest segment, the sources highlight this heavily, and it feels like a massive departure from their historical core competency. Resiliency solutions.
Yes, the resiliency segment.
If they're already housing all their software and AI in the outcomes segment, why suddenly break resiliency out into its own entirely separate pillar?
Well, resiliency solutions generated $16 million in revenue in the first quarter of 2026.
That's pretty small compared to the whole business, right?
It is small right now, but it represents a totally different philosophy. While the other 3 segments are focused on managing the flow of electrons, Resiliency Solutions is focused on the physical protection of the utility itself.
Physical protection. Like security.
More like safety and operations. We're talking about human worker safety, digital construction management, emergency preparedness, and physical damage prevention.
So it's protecting the humans digging the trenches and the physical assets in the ground, not just managing the data on the wires.
Exactly. It is entirely software-oriented. And it uses complex AI models to predict dangerous physical events.
That's a big shift.
It really is. It shifts Itron from just being a silent data provider on the side of a house to being an active, operational participant in physically protecting utility workers and infrastructure.
It totally expands their market.
Right. It expands their total addressable market from just the electrical engineering department into the risk management and physical construction departments.
But wait, this pivot to predictive software, high-frequency waveform analysis, and real-time physical safety logically, that requires immense immediate computing power.
Massive amounts of it.
You can't run that kind of complex, millimeter-accurate AI on a cheap legacy microchip. You need serious horsepower. Which brings us to the strategic inflection point of this entire intelligence stack.
The hardware required to make this software vision a reality.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources outline a major collaboration between Itron and NVIDIA.
Oh, yeah, this is huge.
Now, we are all used to hearing about NVIDIA in the context of massive warehouse-sized centralized data centers training large language models.
Right, the AI boom.
But Itron is taking the NVIDIA Jetson platform, which is a highly advanced, compact AI computing module, and they're integrating it directly into individual Itron endpoints.
Directly at the edge.
Why does this specific piece of edge hardware matter so much to the broader strategy? Why not just send the data to the cloud like everyone else?
The entire strategy hinges on the concept of latency.
Latency, okay.
As we touched on earlier, the topology of the grid is becoming incredibly chaotic.
With the EVs and solar panels.
Right. You have residential solar panels pushing power back onto the grid at noon, electric vehicles drawing massive, unpredictable loads at midnight, and battery storage discharging randomly based on pricing algorithms.
It's a mess.
It is. And if a utility tried to take all that high-fidelity, high-frequency waveform data from millions of individual meters and send it back over a cellular network to a centralized cloud server to be analyzed,
It would be a complete bottleneck.
a massive one.
The bandwidth required to upload millions of continuous, high-definition waveforms would cost a fortune. And the delay in processing the data in the cloud and sending a command back could mean you miss the problem entirely.
Exactly. By the time the central cloud server receives the data, analyzes the anomaly, and sends a command back down the network to shut off the power, the transformer might have already exploded.
Oh, wow. So you need it to be instant.
We're talking about physical events that happen in milliseconds. Integrating the high-performance NVIDIA Jetson platform directly into the endpoint allows the AI inference to happen locally.
So the meter itself is doing the thinking.
Right. The processing happens at the very edge of the grid, in real time, with virtually zero latency.
I get it. Think of it like the human body's spinal reflex system.
How again?
If you accidentally touch a hot stove, your hand doesn't send a pain signal all the way up to your brain. Wait for your brain to process the danger, and then wait for your brain to send a command back down to your arm to pull away.
Right, that takes too long.
If it did that, you'd suffer severe burns. Instead, the nerves in your spine make the decision locally in milliseconds to violently pull your hand back. The brain finds out about it after the fact.
That is spot on. Itron is building a spinal reflex system for the electrical grid, so the grid doesn't burn down while waiting for the cloud to think.
That's incredible.
And the NVIDIA-powered endpoint is continuously learning its local environment, too. It isn't just following a rigid, pre-programmed set of if-then rules.
So it's actual machine learning.
Yes. It is running dynamic inference models, recognizing emerging conditions that signal risk. It can pinpoint an electrical fault instantly.
Because it's trained on that specific local data.
Exactly. Don Reeves, Itron's Senior Vice President of Outcomes, highlighted that this specific architecture gives utilities visibility into emerging conditions closer to the customer, supporting radically faster and more informed operational decisions.
That is a massive technological leap. You are putting supercomputers on telephone poles and sides of houses.
Literally.
And the financial results of this software transformation are starting to compound. When we look at the outcomes engine in the intelligence stack, the numbers are just staggering.
The growth is really impressive.
The outcome segment saw 22% year-over-year revenue growth in the first quarter of 2026.
And on a constant currency basis, stripping out foreign exchange fluctuations, it was 20% growth.
Still huge.
And the critical takeaway is that this growth is directly fueling their annual recurring revenue, or ARR.
ARR. That's the magic metric for Wall Street, right?
It really is. They reached $414 million in ARR by the end of the first quarter, which is up a staggering 28% year over year.
we need to underline why ARR is the holy grail for a company like this.
Go for it.
Annual recurring revenue completely changes how Wall Street values a business. If you are just selling a piece of hardware, like a metal meter, you get paid once.
And then you have to find the next customer.
Right. You have to constantly find new customers just to keep your revenue flat. You get valued at a low hardware multiple. But ARR means you are securing a locked-in, high-margin software revenue stream that pays you year after year.
It's predictable cash flow.
Exactly. So how much of that growing outcome segment is actually recurring subscription revenue versus, say, one-off consulting fees?
Well, an analyst from Baird actually pressed Itron CEO Tom Deitrich on that exact point during the Q1 earnings call.
What did he say?
Deitrich confirmed that generally between 2/3 and 3/4 of the entire outcome segment is pure recurring revenue.
Wow. 2/3 to 3/4.
Yes. Furthermore, he explicitly expects that percentage to drift even higher in the years ahead as more utilities adopt the software suites.
That's a massive shift in their business model.
And almost 100% of the revenue in that new hypergrowth resiliency solutions segment is recurring.
So, synthesizing this, the NVIDIA integration isn't just an expensive technological flex. It is the foundation of a defensive, incredibly sticky financial moat.
It's extremely sticky.
By shifting high-powered AI out to the edge of the grid, Itron is embedding its software into the daily, minute-by-minute survival workflows of the utility company.
Think about the switching costs for a utility. Once a major power company relies on Itron's distributed intelligence algorithms to prevent catastrophic wildfires and balance real-time grid stability across millions of homes.
They can't just unplug it.
Right. Itron becomes entirely indispensable. If a competitor comes along 5 years later offering a slightly cheaper piece of plastic hardware, the utility won't even entertain the conversation.
Because it's not just a meter anymore.
Exactly. You aren't just swapping out a billing meter anymore. You'd be ripping out the central nervous system of your local grid. The risk of disruption is just too high.
Which means Itron has genuine pricing power.
Massive pricing power.
If you are building an indispensable safety and operational network, you don't have to discount your products. You should be able to charge a premium.
And they are.
And looking at the financial realities of Q1 2026, it is incredibly clear that they are doing exactly that. Let's look at this margin rebaselining, because this stood out to me.
It's a huge part of the story. The first quarter of 2026 served as a massive proof point for their thesis.
They had a big beat, right?
Huge. Itron posted a record non-GAAP earnings per share of $1.49. To frame how significant that is, the consensus estimate among Wall Street analysts was only $1.24.
Oh, wow. They crushed it.
They absolutely crushed the expectations. Total revenue came in at a very healthy $587 million.
But the metric that truly demands attention in these reports is the gross margin.
The margin expansion is key.
They reported a massive 490 basis point expansion in adjusted gross margin, hitting 40.7%. Now, wait, hold on.
I know, it sounds crazy.
A 490 basis point jump. Basically, a 5% increase in gross profitability in a single quarter.
It's a lot to process.
I mean, I've seen a dozen tech and hardware companies post numbers like that recently, purely because ocean freight shipping rates collapsed post-pandemic and electronic component costs normalized.
The post-COVID supply chain bump.
Right. I have a hard time believing Itron fundamentally revolutionized their business overnight. Are we sure this isn't just a supply chain mirage that's going to vanish next year? Is this actually sustainable?
The skepticism is absolutely warranted, but the management memos and the segment breakdowns address it head-on.
So it's real.
It appears to be. This does not appear to be a fleeting, one-time favorable mix event or just a temporary dip in shipping costs. The intelligence validates that this is a structural, permanent rebaselining of their profitability.
Okay, what's driving it then?
It's being driven by 3 distinct internal factors that have finally aligned.
Let's pull those 3 factors apart. What is the first driver?
The first factor is that they have finally exhausted what the industry calls the roll-off of pre-inflation legacy contracts.
Ah, meaning they signed massive multi-year deals with utilities back in like 2019 or 2020 before global inflation spiked.
Exactly.
They were locked into fixed pricing, but their actual cost to build the meters skyrocketed in 2021 and 2022. So they've been taking a beating on those specific deliveries for years.
Right. CEO Tom Deitrich noted they have now fully worked their way through those older, toxic contracts.
Finally getting them off the books.
Those deals had virtually no pricing flexibility. By finally completing those low-margin commitments and replacing them with newly priced contracts that accurately reflect the current cost of materials and labor, they permanently remove a massive drag on their gross margins.
It's like paying off a high-interest credit card. You
Yeah.
instantly improve your monthly cash flow just by eliminating the bad debt.
That's exactly what it feels like.
So what is the second factor?
Structural, ruthless operational efficiencies.
Cutting costs.
Big time. This 490 basis point margin expansion heavily reflects multi-year internal self-help initiatives. We are looking at aggressive factory consolidations and a willingness to simply walk away from bad business.
Walking away from business, like what?
For example, management made the strategic and likely difficult decision to completely exit the legacy electricity products market in the EMEA region.
EMEA being Europe, the Middle East, and Africa.
Right.
They just abandoned an entire continent's worth of revenue.
They abandoned revenue because it wasn't profitable revenue.
Oh, I see.
The EMEA hardware market is highly commoditized and fiercely competitive. They simply stopped selling low-margin standard hardware there.
Addition by subtraction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By killing off the low-margin product lines, the remaining business inherently looks vastly more profitable. You can see the result clearly in the segment margins.
How do those break down?
Even their device solutions segment, the absolute legacy hardware business, hit a record 35.4% adjusted gross margin. Network solutions hit 40.8%.
And that leads perfectly into the third factor, which is the culmination of everything we've discussed so far. The software shift.
Yes. The outcomes segment, housing all the AI, the ARR, and the analytics, operated at a 41.7% margin.
That's great.
And that new resiliency solutions segment we highlighted earlier, it operates at a jaw-dropping 73% adjusted gross margin.
73%. That is incredible for an industrial company.
Right. As those software-heavy 70+% margin segments continue to scale faster than the hardware segments and therefore make up a larger overall percentage of Itron's total revenue pie, they structurally pull the entire corporate average margin upward.
So the mix shift itself drives the overall profitability.
Management actually stated on the call that they are already operating well ahead of their stated 2027 long-term margin targets.
The margin expansion looks incredibly durable. You've clearly cleaned house. But, a business can only survive if the pipeline of future work is full.
True.
Your sources detail a massive $4.4 billion multi-year backlog. However, they also note a trailing 12-month book-to-bill ratio of 0.87.
Right, the 0.87 ratio.
For anyone unfamiliar, a book-to-bill ratio under 1.0 means the company is currently billing for completed work faster than they are booking brand new orders.
That's correct.
How should we interpret a shrinking backlog in the middle of a grid modernization supercycle? That seems like a red flag.
To contextualize that 0.87 ratio, we need to decode their specific strategy for converting this existing backlog. That $4.4 billion is a massive multi-year pipeline.
So it's not all happening tomorrow.
No, management explicitly expects it to play out over a 3 to 4 year deployment timeframe. Out of that massive total, about $1.6 billion is classified as 12-month backlog, meaning they are highly confident they will deploy it and recognize the revenue within the next 4 quarters.
The sources make a highly specific, very technical distinction here between RPO, which stands for Remaining Performance Obligations, and gross backlog.
Yes, the accounting distinction.
What is the actual difference between those two numbers, and why does Wall Street care so much?
It really comes down to strict accounting standards versus real-world utility behavior, specifically the ASC 606 Revenue Recognition Accounting Standard.
Okay, ASC 606, what does that dictate?
Many utility contracts, because they're overseen by government bodies, are required by law to include what are known as termination for convenience clauses.
Meaning the utility, or the government regulator, has the legal right to just tear up the contract and walk away at any time without a massive penalty.
Right. Under ASC 606 rules, if a contract contains a termination for convenience clause, the accounting board dictates that you cannot technically count it as a firm guaranteed financial obligation. Therefore, Itron's auditors have to back those specific contracts out of the formal, legally reported RPO calculation.
So the official RPO number looks artificially low because the accountants are forced to assume the worst-case scenario.
Exactly. But Itron's management essentially ignores the RPO and relies on the full $4.4 billion gross backlog for their internal forecasting and supply chain planning.
Why do they feel comfortable ignoring the auditors?
Because of empirical history. Actual cancellation rates for these massive utility contracts are essentially zero.
Because these aren't optional luxury upgrades.
Exactly.
This is non-discretionary critical infrastructure spending. Once a public utility commission approves a billion-dollar rate case to upgrade a grid that is literally failing under the weight of thousands of new electric vehicles, they don't just wake up 2 years into the project and cancel the contract for convenience.
Right. They
They have to finish the job or the lights go out.
The regulatory fine print simply doesn't match the operational reality, so the $4.4 billion is rock solid.
Okay, that makes sense. So the next question is, how do they actually accelerate the conversion of that massive backlog into recognized revenue faster?
How do they speed up the timeline?
Yeah, exactly.
It requires flawless coordination of project deployment timing with the utilities themselves. Deitrich noted that when Itron executes the initial phases smoothly, it builds immense customer confidence.
Success breeds trust.
Right. That confidence often leads the utility to ask Itron to accelerate the deployment schedule for the remaining phases.
Let's get this done faster, essentially.
Furthermore, Itron is currently capitalizing on an incredibly unconstrained internal supply chain. They aren't facing the material shortages of microchips or labor that plagued them in 2022.
The parts are actually in the warehouse now.
Having full warehouses allows them to aggressively drive what the industry calls turns business.
Turns, meaning rapid-fire orders that are booked, manufactured, and shipped within the exact same financial quarter.
Yes. The faster they can turn a new, short-term order, the faster they recognize the revenue, padding the numbers while the massive multi-year backlog slowly deploys in the background.
Okay, so we've established the hardware moat with the NVIDIA Edge integration, and we've walked through the massive financial windfall playing out in the gross margins.
The foundations are strong.
But edge data is virtually useless if the human operators sitting in the utility headquarters can't easily read it, understand it, and act on it.
That is the big challenge.
How is Itron bridging that massive gap between a hyper-advanced smart meter in the field and the average engineer sitting at a desk? Let's dive into innovation, AI, and cloud alliances. You've highlighted two massive tech partnerships driving this, Microsoft and Snowflake.
These two partnerships represent the translation layer.
Translation layer.
Yeah, they turn raw, high-frequency physics data into plain English and actionable financial forecasts. Let's start with Microsoft. The intelligence details the launch of the Itron Intelligent Edge Operating System Connector.
They abbreviate that as the IEOS connector, right?
Yes, the iOS connector built specifically for Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Walk me through a day in the life. What does this IEOS connector actually mean for the person sitting in the utility control room dealing with angry customers?
It signals the end of archaic manual database queries. Let's look at a legacy scenario. If a commercial customer called the utility to complain about a sudden, massive spike in their billing statement, or if an engineer needed to investigate why a specific neighborhood transformer kept tripping offline, that utility worker would historically have to manually cross-reference data across a half-dozen complex, siloed databases.
They'd have to log into the billing system, export a spreadsheet, log into the outage management system, export another spreadsheet, pull the physical maintenance logs. It sounds tedious.
It's tedious, error-prone, and incredibly slow.
So how does Copilot fix that?
The iOS connector fundamentally changes that workflow. It securely grounds the Microsoft 365 Copilot AI in the trusted real-time data streaming from Itron's meter data management system.
Grounding means it's looking at the actual live data, not just training data from the internet.
Exactly. It allows the utility worker to use everyday conversational natural language to interact with massive sets of grid data.
So instead of writing SQL queries or pulling spreadsheets, how does this look in practice?
A customer service rep or an engineer could literally just open up Copilot and type, "Show me the outage history, the daily consumption patterns, and any physical tamper alerts for the transformer serving the Oakwood subdivision over the last 6 months, and highlight any anomalies."
Just like asking a colleague.
Yes. And because it's directly integrated into the Itron data lake, Copilot just instantly surfaces the synthesized answer.
Just like that.
In seconds. And crucially, because it is built on native Microsoft Copilot security protocols, it automatically respects existing enterprise access controls.
Oh, so it won't show you something you don't have clearance for.
Right. It won't hallucinate data, and it only shows the user information they are strictly authorized to see based on their employee credentials.
That automates massive amounts of exception handling.
It drastically reduces manual investigative effort, and it significantly significantly accelerates revenue cycles by clearing up billing disputes instantly rather than taking days of research.
It's turning complex data engineering into a simple chat interface. That is incredibly powerful for daily operations.
It's a huge operational upgrade.
But what about the macro level, the long-term grid planning? Because that is where the Snowflake Alliance comes into play, right?
Exactly. Microsoft Copilot handles the day-to-day triage and natural language queries. Snowflake, which is one of the world's most powerful data cloud platforms, is powering Itron's advanced grid planning solution.
Okay, tell me about that.
The keystone module they've developed here is called PowerFlow.
The sources describe PowerFlow as a first-of-its-kind, 8,760-hour system-wide analysis. I've seen that specific number, 8,760 hours, pop up multiple times. Why is that specific time frame so critical to utility planning?
The math is simple, but the implications are profound. There are exactly 8,760 hours in a standard year.
365 days multiplied by 24 hours, of course. So it's an entire year modeled hour by hour.
Yes. Traditional grid planning software tools are incredibly blunt instruments. They typically rely on seasonal or annual snapshots.
Snapshots, like taking a picture of the grid.
Kind of. An engineer would look at the peak load on the absolute hottest day of the summer when every air conditioner is running, and the peak load on the coldest day of the winter. They would plan the physical size of the transformers and wires around those two massive extremes.
But that blunt methodology doesn't work anymore, does it? Because the grid isn't just reacting to the weather anymore, it's reacting to Deere's distributed energy resources.
The traditional model completely breaks down in the face of Deere's. Let's look at the famous duck curve in California.
The duck curve.
If a neighborhood has heavy solar panel penetration, they might be generating massive amounts of excess power at 2:00 p.m. when the sun is blazing but nobody is home. The grid has too much power.
Right.
But at 7 p.m., the sun goes down, the solar panels stop producing, and simultaneously, everyone gets home from work, turns on their electric ovens, and plugs in their Teslas.
The power demand skyrockets violently in a matter of minutes.
Exactly. A seasonal snapshot completely misses those incredibly volatile hour-by-hour intraday dynamics.
So to truly plan the modern grid and prevent transformers from blowing up at 7 p.m., you have to run high-fidelity simulations for every single one of those 8,760 hours of the year.
Every single hour.
You have to model the sun, the temperature, the EV charging habits, the battery discharges. That sounds incredibly complex.
Running a simulation of that complexity system-wide down to the individual neighborhood bus level is computationally prohibitive for almost every utility on Earth.
They just don't have the hardware for it.
They simply do not have the server farms to run that much math. But by natively leveraging Snowflake's massive, fully managed, high-performance AI data cloud, Itron makes this essential 8,760-hour analysis entirely practical.
Oh, because Snowflake provides the processing power.
Right. Itron and Snowflake handle the petabytes of compute in the background, delivering immediate, highly accurate forecasts without the utility having to build and maintain a supercomputer.
So Microsoft handles the daily operations. Snowflake handles the heavy compute long-term forecasting. But I want to connect this back to the physical world.
Human safety.
Right, to human safety. How does all this edge computing and cloud forecasting actually save lives and property? The intelligence details deep collaborations with Gordian Technologies and a company called Commoditization, specifically focused on wildfire prevention.
This is where we see the life and death impact of that waveform data processing we spent so much time discussing earlier.
Okay, let's examine the Commoditization collaboration.
This isn't theoretical, by the way. It is currently deployed on more than 800 active electric distribution circuits with San Diego Gas and Electric.
SDG&E in Southern California.
Right.
A region that is obviously hyper-aware of the devastating financial and human costs of utility-sparked wildfires.
The stakes couldn't be higher there. The project combines Itron's high-resolution, edge-computed distributed intelligence data with Commoditization's proprietary Cascadence predictive analytics platform.
Cascadence.
They are ingesting massive amounts of disparate grid data, smart meters, substation power quality monitors, relay signals, and applying highly advanced physics-based location algorithms and machine learning models.
What exactly are these algorithms hunting for in the data?
They are hunting for the absolute earliest subtle precursors to mechanical failure.
Before anything actually breaks.
Exactly. They are looking for microscopic abnormal voltage behavior or repeating waveform patterns that indicate physical equipment stress.
And where does Gordian come in?
Gordian Technologies provides the optimized, lightweight software layer that allows the NVIDIA Edge devices to run these complex neural networks locally, classifying millions of high-frequency data events in milliseconds.
So they aren't waiting for a 911 call about a downed power line. They are digitally watching the physical equipment vibrating or sparking subtly days or even weeks before the line actually fatigues and falls into the dry brush.
That's the goal. The overarching objective here is to dramatically improve two critical, highly regulated industry metrics, SAI-FI and SAI-D.
Break those acronyms down for us.
SAI-FI stands for the System Average Interruption Frequency Index, basically how often power goes out.
Okay. And SAI-D.
SAI-D is the System Average Interruption Duration Index, how long the power stays out.
Frequency and duration.
Public utility commissions use these exact metrics to either financially penalize or reward utility companies.
So predicting a failure isn't just about safety. It has a direct, massive impact on the utility's bottom line and regulatory standing.
Absolutely. By identifying these early warning signs through waveform analysis, utility crews can roll a truck to proactively fix or replace the stressed component before it causes a sustained outage or ignites a catastrophic fire.
Preventative maintenance.
And if an unavoidable outage does occur, say, a drunk driver hits a pole, the precise, millimeter-accurate location data generated from the waveform analysis dramatically accelerates fault location.
Because the meters know exactly where the waveform broke.
The crews know exactly where to go, reducing restoration times from hours to minutes.
It is a total game changer for utilities facing billions of dollars in existential liability for wildfires.
It really is.
Which logically brings us to a fascinating point about corporate finance. How on earth is Itron funding all of this massive innovation?
Money has to come from somewhere.
Exactly. Let's dive into capital allocation and M&A. I was reviewing these financial engineering maneuvers in the intelligence, and I have to ask, how do you fund a massive corporate transition from metal hardware to AI software without completely crushing your balance sheet, especially in today's high interest rate environment?
Itron's Treasury Department executed a masterful, highly strategic piece of debt architecture in February of 2026.
What did they do?
They upsized and priced a massive $700 million convertible senior notes offering.
Okay, $700 million.
These notes mature in 2032, and the coupon rate, the actual cash interest rate they have to pay bondholders every year on that massive debt is exactly 0.00%.
Wait, 0% interest on $700 million of unsecured debt.
0%.
In an environment where the risk-free rate is hovering around 4 or 5%, that is financial alchemy.
It's incredible timing and structuring.
So they secured incredibly cheap capital to repay their older, more expensive debt maturing in 2026, and they have hundreds of millions left over to fund this aggressive grid modernization push. And they did it without dragging down those beautiful expanding operating margins we talked about earlier, with variable, fluctuating interest rates.
If they had used their traditional revolving credit facility, the interest payments would be tied to SOFR, or prime rates. Those payments would fluctuate with the broader market, immediately eating into the hard-fought gross margin expansions. The 0% notes lock in cost certainty.
But there is no free lunch in corporate finance. The investors buying those notes aren't doing it out of charity. It's a convertible note, meaning the debt can be converted into actual shares of Itron stock by the debt holders if the stock price goes up.
Yes, that's the catch.
Doesn't a $700 million convertible note essentially guarantee massive, painful stock dilution for existing shareholders down the line? You're just trading interest payments today for a massive dilution penalty tomorrow.
That is the exact structural risk of convertible debt. You are betting against your own stock price. But what's fascinating here is how Itron brilliantly mitigated that future dilution. They didn't just take the money and hope for the best. They engineered a complex synthetic hedge.
Walk me through the mechanics of that hedge. How do you stop the dilution?
Let's look at the math. When they issued the $700 million in debt, the initial conversion price was set at roughly $123.77 per share.
Okay.
That represented a 30% premium over where the stock was trading on the day of the deal. If the stock eventually blows past $123.77, the bondholders will convert their debt to stock, forcing Itron to print millions of new shares.
Which dilutes everyone else.
To protect existing shareholders from that exact scenario, Itron took $80.7 million of the cash proceeds and immediately purchased what are called capped call transactions.
Explain a capped call simply. It's basically a highly specific financial insurance policy that pays out if the stock goes up, right?
A call option gives you the right, but not the obligation, to buy a stock at a specific price in the future. By purchasing these capped calls on their own stock, Itron essentially bought the right to acquire their own shares at a predefined price.
I see.
If the stock rockets upward and the bondholders decide to convert their debt, Itron can exercise these call options. The payout from the options offsets the cost of the newly minted shares, synthetically neutralizing the dilution up to a certain cap.
That is brilliant. But they didn't stop there with the financial engineering, did they?
No, they didn't. They simultaneously used another $100 million of the proceeds to execute a concurrent share repurchase program.
A stock buyback.
Yes. They aggressively bought back roughly 1.05 million shares of their own stock right off the open market on the exact same day.
So let me get this straight. They took $700 million in free, 0% money from investors. They used a chunk of it to permanently retire 1 million shares of stock today, instantly making the remaining shares more valuable. And then they bought an insurance policy against printing new shares tomorrow.
That is an absolute masterclass in capital allocation.
It really is.
It creates a highly efficient, virtually risk-free capital bridge. And crucially, it leaves them with plenty of dry powder to execute on their aggressive mergers and acquisitions strategy.
Which brings us to how they actually built out that new 73% margin resiliency solutions segment we discussed.
The acquisitions were key there.
Right. The sources detail the massive acquisition of LocusView for $525 million. How does a company like LocusView, alongside their previous acquisition of Urbint, fit into this physical resiliency thesis?
Well, Urbint brings highly advanced AI-enhanced solutions for predicting emergency scenarios, physical damage prevention, and worker safety based on weather and historical data.
Okay, so that's the prediction side.
LocusView provides an entirely different, incredibly practical solution for what is called digital construction management.
What does digital construction management actually mean for a utility? We were talking about digging ditches and laying pipe, not writing code.
Think about the actual messy physical life cycle of building a grid asset. A utility decides to install a new underground gas line.
It's a massive project.
Huge. They have to plan the route, source the physical materials, hire external contractors to dig the trenches, monitor the safety of those workers, and finally, formally close out the massive project with regulators so the utility can legally add the new asset to their rate base and start charging customers for it.
And historically, how is that tracked?
Historically, this involves messy paper maps, unrecorded deviations where a contractor had to route a pipe 2 feet to the left to avoid a rock, and massive regulatory delays.
A contractor writes down the wrong GPS coordinate on a clipboard, and 10 years later, someone digging a pool hits a gas line.
Exactly. LocusView digitizes and automates that entire physical construction process from the initial planning phase to the final regulatory closeout.
So it tracks everything digitally.
It creates a flawless, high-fidelity digital twin of the physical construction process in real time. Together with Urbint, Itron is no longer just managing the invisible data flowing on the grid. They are aggressively managing and monetizing the physical construction and protection of the grid itself.
And as we noted, by selling that software to utilities, that resiliency segment operates at a stunning 73% margin.
Which is fantastic.
If we take a step back and look at the totality of this intelligence stack, we have record financial earnings, a $1.49 EPS that completely crushed Wall Street estimates.
Huge beat.
We have a massive structural 490 basis point gross margin expansion. We have deeply sticky, mission-critical AI integrations with NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Snowflake.
Best partners in the business.
And we have brilliant non-dilutive capital allocations, securing $700 million at 0% interest, funding highly accretive software acquisitions. The narrative seems completely bulletproof, flawless.
The fundamentals are undeniably strong, but the public market didn't see it that way on earnings day.
Which brings us to a critical analysis of market skepticism and risks. Because if everything is so structurally incredible, why did Itron's stock price slide 7 to 8% immediately following this supposedly triumphant Q1 earnings report? We need to look closely at the bear case.
The slide was triggered by two specific phrases that terrify algorithmic trading models: deployment lumpiness and weaker than expected forward guidance.
Break down deployment lumpiness. Where was the lumpiness occurring?
We saw it acutely in the network solutions segment. Despite the massive gross margin percentage improvements we lauded earlier, the actual top-line revenue for the network solutions segment declined 13% in the first quarter.
13%, that's a big drop.
Management was forced to state that this decline was driven entirely by the timing of large project deployments.
Meaning Itron had the equipment ready, But the utility companies physically weren't ready to install the equipment during that specific 90-day financial window.
Utilities are massive, slow-moving bureaucracies. They suffer from severe labor shortages. They might not have enough trained linemen to install the thousands of networked routers they purchased.
Or weather gets in the way.
Exactly. Or they face unexpected severe weather delays that halt all physical construction. If the utility delays the installation by a month, Itron's revenue recognition gets pushed into the next quarter.
It creates a lumpy, unpredictable revenue chart that Wall Street despises.
Wall Street wants a smooth line up and to the right.
And that lumpiness carried over into their forward forecast, didn't it?
It did. Management guided their Q2 earnings per share to a range of $1.25 to $1.35. The Street consensus was aggressively looking for $1.45.
Ouch.
The market hates uncertainty, and openly missing next quarter's consensus by 10 to 20 cents triggered an immediate algorithmic sell-off.
This raises a profoundly important question about where we are in the broader macroeconomic cycle. We have opposing analyst viewpoints in the intelligence stack. Baird upgraded the stock, arguing that the grid modernization supercycle is only just beginning.
Right.
But Raymond James initiated an underperform rating on the stock. What's the core fundamental thesis behind the Raymond James downgrade?
Raymond James is arguing a peak cycle thesis.
Peak cycle.
They argue that the massive physical deployment of metering infrastructure may have actually peaked back in 2024. Their underlying logic is that utilities panicked over the last 2 years due to post-pandemic supply chain shortages, and they rushed to double-order massive amounts of hardware just to ensure they had inventory.
Hoarding meters, basically.
Exactly. Now that those supply chains are fully normalizing, Raymond James believes the frantic pace of new metering deployments is going to moderate significantly. They view Itron through the lens of a cyclical hardware manufacturer that just passed the top of the roller coaster.
I have to challenge the logic of that Raymond James thesis based on everything we've uncovered today.
Let's hear it.
If broader utility capital spending is structurally, legally mandated to increase exponentially through the end of the decade, simply to handle the massive, unprecedented load growth from new AI data centers and the political push for electric vehicles, how can the deployment of smart metering possibly be at a cyclical peak? The grid has to expand.
It requires a nuanced distinction between the life cycle of hardware and the life cycle of software.
Explain that.
The physical installation of the hardware meters, the metal and plastic boxes being bolted to houses, might indeed experience cyclical lulls. If a major utility like Commoditization just finished a 5-year project swapping out 3 million physical meters in New York, they aren't going to buy 3 million more next year.
That makes sense.
That creates the exact deployment lumpiness and the moderating hardware cycles that Raymond James is warning clients about.
I see. The hardware sales will inevitably ebb and flow based on construction schedules?
However, the Baird upgrade focuses on the software and AI side of the outcomes and resiliency segments. That revenue is structural, non-cyclical, and compounding.
Because it's a subscription.
Once that piece of hardware is bolted to the house, the cyclicality ends, and the utility begins paying highly predictable, recurring monthly subscription fees for the DI analytics, the Snowflake 8,760-hour forecasting, and the Microsoft Copilot integrations year after year, regardless of whether they are physically installing new meters that month.
So we arrive at the final verdict. The quality transformation. We have to weigh the totality of the evidence for you. Is that 8% post-earnings stock slide a varied early warning valuation re-rating signaling cyclical hardware headwinds to come? Or is it, as the bulls would vehemently argue, a generational buying opportunity for long-term investors willing to look past a 90-day weather delay?
When you synthesize the data, the evidence strongly supports the case for a fundamental quality transformation.
The pivot to software.
By deliberately shifting its core revenue mix away from the viciously cyclical hardware manufacturing business and aggressively toward high-margin software and AI orchestration, Itron is actively structurally insulating itself from those traditional hardware cyclicality risks.
The definitive proof of that transformation is written in the margins.
The math backs that up entirely. A mature legacy industrial company does not accidentally expand its gross margins by 490 basis points in a single quarter.
No, they don't.
A legacy hardware vendor does not accidentally build a $414 million annual recurring revenue software business that is compounding at 28% year over year. The high-margin outcomes and resiliency segments now make up a full 25% of their massive total backlog, and that share is actively growing every quarter.
The ultimate conclusion here is that as long as the insatiable AI data center boom and global electrification megatrends continue to accelerate, the physical electrical grid will require a vastly more sophisticated, hyper-fast intelligence layer to manage the ensuing chaos.
The old grid just won't cut it.
And Itron's incredibly sticky hardware-agnostic distributed intelligence platform is positioning the company to be the indispensable, highly profitable gatekeeper of that modern grid.
They have successfully transformed from a passive, easily replaceable hardware vendor into a proactive, AI-driven strategic partner that modern utilities literally cannot operate without. The switching costs have simply become too high.
Which brings us to the end of our investigative mission today. I want to thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into Itron. It's a dense, highly complex narrative spanning physics, artificial intelligence, and corporate financial engineering. But it is one that is absolutely vital to understanding the hidden architecture of our future infrastructure.
It's an important story to track.
It really is. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, highly speculative thought to mull over, something that builds logically on everything we've unpacked today. We've talked extensively about Itron putting high-powered, low-latency NVIDIA AI processors at the very edge of the grid, embedding them inside millions of individual endpoints across the country.
Right, the edge computing push.
Right now, today, those processors are mostly looking inward. They are analyzing the electrical waveform purely to protect the local utility equipment. But if you zoom out, if you have millions of decentralized high-performance computing nodes scattered across every single home, apartment, and business in a major metropolitan area, could those distributed smart meters eventually be linked together to form their own massive decentralized computing network?
Oh, wow.
Could the physical electrical grid itself eventually become a giant distributed AI data center, renting out compute power and fundamentally blurring the line between utility infrastructure and big tech infrastructure? It is a fascinating, potentially limitless possibility for the future of edge computing. Risk defined, portfolio protected.